Welcome everybody to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. Welcome home to Torah. Yes, we're streaming from Yerushalayim, and we do warmly welcome anyone who wants to learn Torah. So here we go. We're in chapter 25 of Leviticus. It's Parashat Behar, and there's two words in the first sentence that are very unusual. You don't see these two words in any other verse like this. The words Behar Sinai, yes, it's true. It appears many times, but not in the verse that says God spoke to Moses at Har Sinai saying, V'yedaber Adonai al Moshe b'Har Sinai lemor. That's verse 1 of chapter 25. And there's a very famous Rashi. Let's just read the rest of the verse 2 as well. Saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come to the land I am giving you, the land shall rest a Sabbath to the Lord. So we're going to have an issue with these words, Behar Sinai. We need to explain them. And what does it mean that the land itself is resting as a Shabbat to the Lord? What does that mean? So let's look at Rashi. He says right away, right off the bat, the famous question that's asked by everybody, what special reverence does the subject of Shemitah, which is the release, the shamet is like to release, to cease, to stop, okay? So you're stopping the work during the seventh year. And that's what the Parasha begins with. So what exactly is the special relevance? What's the relevance to Mount Sinai? Were all the commandments coming from Har Sinai? We were there for 40 years in the desert. We were there for, let's say, just short of a year at the mountain itself. So the whole Torah was given to us. However, you know what's coming to teach us? That just as this Parsha will detail so many details about the laws of Shemitah and Jubilee, Yovel, that just as its general principles for this particular mitzvah and all of the details of this particular mitzvah were given at Mount Sinai, so too this is a lesson that all the Torah, the entire Torah, was given at Mount Sinai. Now, that's all very nice, but really, how do you learn that? In other words, it's very nice those two words appear. It's very nice that Rashi says that. But we have to have a better understanding of what it really means that the whole Torah was given at Mount Sinai. And what does it mean that it's a Sabbath to the Lord? For the sake of the Lord. In other words, it's for God's sake. Just as it's said about Shabbos. You can find that in Exodus chapter 20, verse 10. Meaning, just as every seventh day is a holy Sabbath, acclaiming that God Himself rested on the seventh day, and thus acclaiming that God is the supreme creator of all existence. Likewise, man must rest from working the land on the seventh year. This is concerning Shemitah, for the sake of God. In other words, it's for the sake of God, not for the sake of the land. Not for the sake of the land that it should gain fertility by laying fallow for a year. In other words, in the world, if you ask farmers what do? They rotate, they do crop rotation, they do certain things with their field to lie fallow so that it will either replenish or somehow the minerals won't be wasted away and it'll be able to continue to produce. Okay, so it's not for that. What does it mean it's not for that? What does it mean it's for God? So it's very nice, we just heard Rashi, but we will go and we will explore the depths of what this means according to the Kliyakar. So let's start. And by the way, for those who are not familiar, this is a very text-oriented series. We are basing the outline on the Kliyakar. So we're basically reading and translating. I'm translating. And you can write comments in and ask questions, of course. Ma inyan shmita etzel Har Sinai. These are basically the words of Rashi. What exactly is the concept of Shemitah? What's the relevance to Har Sinai? As some of us would say, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China, right? For those who are familiar with those words. So the Kliyakar begins with his famous words that he usually begins with when it is simple. He says, Karov lishmoa. It's easy to understand. Come close and hear. It's close to hear. Remember, the word lishmoa, it means to hear, but it means to understand. It's close to be understood as the following. Kisha'ala Moshe al Har Sinai, when Moses went up to the mountain. Achar Shiva Shavuot, after 7 weeks, because that's exactly what happened. We left Egypt on the 15th of Nisan, and we arrived the beginning of Sivan, and we received the Torah on the 50th day after leaving Egypt. So it's after 7 weeks, Shesapru Yisrael Tisha v'Arba'im Yom, that the Jewish people, that Am Yisrael counted, they counted 49 days, min Pesach, the Ad Atzeres, from Passover until Shavuot. Now this is the important words. Nitkadesh Az, then the mountain became holy. Nitkadesh Az Oto Hahar, that very mountain that God appeared. Now that was holy only when God wanted it to be holy. In other words, we don't know where Mount Sinai is today. God didn't want us to know. There's no holiness to Mount Sinai. But that very day when God appeared, and that time when God had us standing at the mountain for the several months, almost a year we were there, so then it was holy. But guess what? On that particular day, it was even more sanctified. V'neser b'zriya v'charisha b'yom chamishim. It became forbidden for us to sow or to harvest anything on that particular day. Which day? Shabo nitna haTorah, the day that the Torah was given. V'huzman mashichat haYovel likro dror v'chovshi l'kol Yisrael. This was a special time. This was a unique time. That particular time drew forth what we're going to call Yovel. What does Yovel mean? It means produce, it's true. It also means plenty, also true. So there's this, well, let's just say like this jubilee, this unbelievable satiety. Likro dror, to call out, to proclaim dror. Dror is freedom, chafshi, and another type of freedom, right? Liberty. L'kol Yisrael, we actually experience true freedom. How? Through the Torah. It's the Torah itself that grants us and gave us true freedom. We were slaves to Pharaoh. Now we are enslaved, or is that a word? We were subjugated to Hashem, and listen to these words. Cherut al haluchot. Now I believe I have here in Exodus 32:16, in that verse it says, now the tablets were God's work, and the inscription was God's inscription, Charut al haluchot. The word Charut means inscribed, okay? So through the inscription, we're talking about God himself with his so-called, whatever it means, his finger, God himself engraved the tablets, and the word charut, which means engraved, has another meaning. When it's cherut. In fact, there was a political party in Israel called the Cherut Party. It's called the Freedom Party. So it's through the engraving. Now think about it another way. When you take ink and you write on a piece of paper or parchment, you're adding something to the paper, okay? And the same thing would be by a stone. You're adding something to the stone. When you engrave, you're doing something different. You're removing something, it's true, but you're creating borders all as well. And it's through this engraving on the stone, which God himself created and did. And this is one of the miracles, by the way, that when you looked at we'll call them the 10 Commandments for the sake of this conversation. We're talking about the 10 statements. Okay, there's 620 letters. You were on one side, you look straight through. it wasn't like you had a regular simple engraving where you could put your fingers on it and feel it, right? And reading Braille, well, I think Braille's raised, but this was inside, but you could see all the way through it. And wait, when you were on the other side, you could see also all the way through it, but it was read correctly. In other words, if you read from right to left, you would expect if you went to the other side, it would be somehow backwards reading it from left to right. But that wasn't the case. This was one of the miracles. When you saw these 10 commandments, these 2 tablets, you knew that this was miraculous. Look at this Rashi, the word engraved. This is still 32:16 in Rashi. So in Hebrew it's Kharot. The words Kharot or Kharot with a tuf or a tet, doesn't matter, are one and the same. Both are an impression of engraving. Okay, so that's what Kharut means. But Cherut means freedom. So what we just read was, why is this special time of Shavuot? It's not just Shavuot, it was the very day that we received the Torah. And what else happened? There was the Kol Shofar. There was a blowing of the shofar. Al Yidei Kol Shofar Shel Matan Torah. At the time of the revelation, so you had this tremendous holiness, absolute freedom, and the blowing of the shofar. Besides that, we saw noise, we heard light. I mean, this was beyond natural senses. Ba'oto zman higid HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe inyan hashmita v'hayovel. It's true. At that time, meaning at the time of giving the revelation, when God spoke to Moses and told him all about the Torah, he told him all the details of Shemitah, but not just Shemitah, the whole Torah, but for sure Shemitah. Okay, so that's what we got to so far. Lomar, what is it? What is this saying? Sheba mispar shiva uba mispar teisha v'arbayim. That special number 7 and number 49. Ani notain. God is saying, I'm giving kedusha zu, this special holiness, lekol eretz Yisrael, to the entire land of Israel. Now, there are midrashim that explain that this mountain, it's called. What is it called? It's called Choreb, but it has many other names. One of the many names it's called is Mount Moriah. Where's Mount Moriah? It's right here. It's around the corner from where we're at. So Mount Moriah is the Temple Mount. That on a spooky level, on a metaphysical level, we were transported, and there must be another word besides transported, it sounds too much like Star Trek, that we were somehow transformed. Is that a good word? I don't know. Transported, somehow or another, those two places met physically or metaphysically, and there's a lot of Kedusha, and we're talking about as if we were in Eretz Yisrael, even though we were at Mount Sinai where we saw and experienced the revelation of God. It was like we were in Eretz Yisrael at the same time. Sheyesh la dimyon v'yachas im har Sinai. So we're talking about Eretz Yisrael. At the time of the revelation, we had the shofar, we had the light and sound show, we had this proclamation of freedom. Now you're getting a little taste of what it means to have every 7th year and every 50th year a special declaration of real, true freedom. And of course we blow the shofar to introduce the year, right? There's a lot of, overlaps and similarities. So we just got done saying that sheyesh la dimyon v'yachas im har Sinai mitzad hayota avir d'machshin. So in Gemara Bava Basra it mentions that Eretz Yisrael has a special attribute about the air, the atmosphere, that it causes wisdom. It brings, just breathe in the air and you become wise. Okay? This is what it's brought down. So too, that's what happened at Mount Sinai. We were filled with the wisdom of God on a level that we only hope and pray that we get a taste of it. And he brings down in the Medrash, there's a concept that says, Ein Torah Ketorat Eretz Yisrael. There's no comparison to the Torah you learn in Brooklyn right, Daniel? Or wherever you are, somewhere Far Rockaway, where is it? Okay, or Mayor in Washington, right? Or Tova, well, she's in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so you cannot compare the Torah learned outside of the land. Maybe in Beijing, right? We have Zahava. There's no comparison. You got to get back to the land. Or Har Sinai. You can't compare you cannot compare the Torah like Eretz Yisrael or Har Sinai. They're unique in themselves. Al Kain, Rui Litain Gam Ha'aretzahi, Kedushas Har Sinai. Therefore, it's actually fitting that Hashem would place on the land of Israel the exact holiness that was experienced at Har Sinai, Achar Mispar Teshav Arbim Shana, every 49 years. V'chein B'mispar Shiva, so too, every 7 years. Now, when he says O could mean or it can mean addition to. Kedei la'asot zikaron l'mamad Har Sinai b'kriyat drur v'avarat shofar. In order to remember that unbelievable experience of the receiving of the Torah, of standing by Har Sinai, and there was a proclamation of freedom, kriyat drur. It says, I'm from Philadelphia, so I have a little bit of a, right, there's a Liberty Bell, and yes, it was cracked on the first try around, and there's a pasuk, there's a verse in Leviticus, this is it right here, in our chapter 25, where the shofar should be blown, and liberty should be proclaimed throughout the land to all its inhabitants. And here we're saying that this idea is in order to remember, as a remembrance to standing on Har Sinai, that every 50th year, right, there's going to be this proclamation, and the avarat shofar, and the blowing of the shofar. Okay, mitzorf l'shar tamim sheyesh l'mitzvazu. This is in addition to many other reasons for this mitzvah, and that's why it says Behar Sinai, because that was the first question we asked. What exactly is unique? Why does this verse? Usually the verse is V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying over, tell the Jewish people. But here you got these two words. So we already mentioned this is going to let us know that all the Torah, every mitzvah, with its generalities and its details, were told over at Mount Sinai. Now I just wanted to mention, because I mentioned to the people on Skype, that when we finish this class, it's going to be about 40 minutes, maybe a half hour altogether. I have something very interesting about Sphira in a book called The Olos Ephraim, which is by the Kli Yakar, but it goes much more in depth. So whoever wants to, I'm talking to the people on the camera, look for, I don't know the title yet, we'll probably call it the Sfirat HaOmer according to the Olos Ephraim. Unless, whatever. So look for that, okay? Because it's going to go much more in depth. So we will continue with the second verse. V'shav Saharetz Shabbos LaHashem. So we mentioned that this is going to be a land, the land's going to rest as something dedicated to God, right? A Sabbath to the Lord. So what does that mean? So we read the Rashi, that it's not for the sake of the land. Okay, so let's read the Kli Yakar. B't'am mitzvah zu yesh deot chalukot. According to the reason here, there are many different opinions. Ki rabim omrim, there are many that say, shetamu, the real reason is, shetishbo ta'aretz kadei shetosif teit kocha lezoreya. As we mentioned in the introduction, that if you lay the land fallow, that will add or increase the ability for the minerals to produce really healthy fruit. Uledeya zu, noto harav more. The Rambam in the Mar Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, leans in that direction. The Rabbim choikim alav. Many disagree with him, and they ask some really good questions. Because if it was about the land lying fallow, she'im chashasha haTorah lezeh, if the Torah itself, meaning if Hashem was at all concerned about the land lying fallow in order for it to be replenished, or have more energy, lezeh shelo tichalesh adama, that the land shouldn't become infertile. Lami yischayvu galut al shmita ta'aretz. Why would the punishment or the consequence of not keeping Shemitah properly obligate the Jewish people to be exiled from their land? In other words, what would happen? Usually we say measure for measure, okay? So if the Jews are not keeping Shemitah, meaning they're working the land, and it's draining the energy, so then measure for measure, right? You don't need a miracle. Let the Jews suffer with very low output of produce or inferior produce. That would be measure for measure. That's one way. Another way we're going to look at it is if they're exiled from their land and non-Jews then come, because they're kicked out and this other nations come, so then they're going to work the land perpetually, right? Without non-stop, because they don't have an obligation to rest on the 7th and on the 50th, 49th to 50th year. Okay, so let's read what the Kli Yakar has to say. Exactly as we said, let it be that the punishment should just be that there's no revitalization of the ground, right? Let the land drain itself. Furthermore, he says, She'ein zeh Shabbos l'Hashem. If the whole idea is to replenish the minerals, allow the minerals to replenish themselves, there's nothing to do with God. It's not a Sabbath to the Lord. It's a Sabbath to the land, because you're allowing the land, and the matara, the goal, is to replenish the land. Ki'im l'tzar haaretz. It sounds like if it's for the sake of revitalizing the land, it's for the land's sake. So what does it mean if you look in chapter 26, verse 34? It actually says, then the land will be appeased regarding its sabbaticals. This is talking about when the Jews are no longer on their land, as a result, being in exile, during all the days that it remains desolate, while you are in the land of your enemies, the land will rest and thus appease its sabbaticals. So, someone asked me when I was learning it this week, the land will not be worked? No, the land will be worked. But for some reason, it's not going to produce, or it's not going to produce for whom? For the Gentiles who come to our land. They never made it into a capital. They never made it into a productive area in which to settle. They came expecting to settle, expecting that this fertile crescent would be very well suited for them, and they weren't able to stay. So the land itself did not supply, even though it was worked, it didn't supply what it needed to supply, and yet it's still called that the land will rest. Look at this into the Hebrew. Az tirtza aretz et shabtoteha. The land is actually going to be appeased for the sabbaticals. Again, what does that mean? Az tishbot aretz v'hirtzat et shabtoteha. This appeasing of the land itself. So the Kli Yakar explains, Ma tarviach b'zeh. What do you gain? What profit is there? Sheyigalu mimenu Yisrael, that the Jewish people would end up being exiled from their land. V'yeshvu aleha hagoyim asher leolam bo ya'avodu. What benefit will there be for the Jews in being exiled and will settle this land? Who's going to live here? Non-Jews. And they're going to work the land incessantly. Ve'ein tishpo ta'aretz hashemama mehem. The land will not have a rest in its desolation of not having the Jews there. So none of that makes any sense. So the Educator, and I put a small little biography. This is Rav Isaac ben Moshe Arama. He died just shortly after 1492. And he was part of the exile of Spain, and he settled in Naples when he left. Okay, and he wrote a book called the Akedat Yitzhak, and it's a fantastic sefer. And I'm not going to give any more. I don't want to read it anymore, but it's an amazing sefer. So he quotes it in the Akedah, Natan Tamacher. There's a different reason. And it says like this: Shetachlit mitzvah zu, that the purpose of this mitzvah, the goal of this mitzvah, is lezecher chidush ha'olam. What does that mean? Chidush ha'olam means, lezecher chidush ha'olam means that we should remember that there's a God who created the world, and He created it from nothing, ex nihilo. We say yesh miyayin. Now I want to tell you, yesh miyayin usually means something from nothing, but that's not what happened. There was something. It was pure spirit. It was nothing to do with matter or anything physical, and God created the physicality out of whatever energy He chose to. But He's the creator, and He created it in 6 days. And we remember this. This is going to be the purpose of the 7th year and of the shmita, of the Yovel year. Lizkor yemos olam v'sof yimei cheldo. In order to remember all of history, and this is the way of the world, that it will eventually disintegrate, so too the Abarbanel, similar time period, also wrote the same concepts, but he even added things that are a little bit contradictory here. But the Kliyakar says like this: Gam zer rachok mikilotai. This is so far from reason. Everything we just said, according to the Educator and according to the Abarbanel. Why? The word kilotai is my kidneys. This is so distant from my kidneys, because the kidneys is the place where reason takes place. And he says like this, he gives a slang expression, which basically means no further proof. You don't have to bring such a faraway proof as what? As Shemitah and Yovel, because if you wanted to remember that there's a chidush olam, that there's a creator of the world who created the right, and it's a constant reminder, you have every 7 days a reminder. It's called Shabbos. Kiyom ha-Shabbos ha-Tamidi, v'kol shavua bo, l'zecher chidush olam. You have something not in the distant future of every 7 years, or even the far distant future of every 50 years. You have something every single day that you can remember Shabbos, because you're obviously it's every 7 days, so you need to prepare. So something as consistent and as often as Shabbos, imhu lo yoil. If Shabbos doesn't help you remember that this is about remembering that there's a creator, ma yoshienu zeh haba liitim rechokim. What salvation would there be for us if this is coming every 7 or 49, 50 years? So he basically tears apart the idea that the Balakeda and the Abarbanel brought. And so the Kliyakar continues, Ukdeli Ashev Kamed Dikdukim B'Lashon HaParsha. He would like to resolve several of the finer points of the language within the Parsha. Omer Ani, he says, I say, Shatam Mitzvah Zuhu, the real reason, one of the main reasons, and this is why he disagreed with the Abarbanel and the Akeda regarding this Chidush Olam. Listen, it could be tied in. It's really not very far, but he's giving a different reason. And that is to lahashrish et Yisrael b'mida ba'amuna u'bitachon b'Hashem. To embed, to really make and root it within the Jewish people this trait of faith and trust. Now, knowing that Hashem, I believe that Hashem created the world in 6 days, that's very nice. But what happens on a daily basis? Where is my faith and my trust? Right? How far am I going to go to really know that Hashem is the provider? Okay? It's a little bit different. I don't really think it's that much different, because we talk about that God renews the world every second. It's not that He's just the creator of the world. Because in Greek philosophy, or certain philosophies, they believe in a creator, that He created the world and then He left. He doesn't deal with petty stuff. Here we're saying not only He's so involved in every one of our lives, but that every moment He actually recreates the world because He wants to. He's so involved. So that's a lot of faith as well. But let's just say it's from a different angle, okay? It's in Emunah and Bitachon. Ki Hashash HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem was chashash, he was concerned. Pen bevom el haaretz, that once we came to the land of Israel, of course, yitasku ba'avodat adama, that we would become involved in the physical work of the land, al minhag hativi'i, in a very natural way, that we would behave like every other farmer, every other country. We would work the land and, farm it and believe like everyone else that what we do is causing the results. Okay, when you do things naturally, you expect that natural results. I plant X amount of seed in X amount of acres, I expect X amount of yield, right? Unless there is what do you call act of God, tornadoes or floods or a dry spell. The kasher hikbir motzo yodam, and then through the success they find through their own hands, yishkachu et Hashem, God forbid, they would forget Hashem, v'yasiru bitchona mimenu, and their faith would leave them, right? Because they're no longer God-centered, they're self-centered. V'yakshavu ki kocham v'oitzim yodam, and this is a big problem. This is what we all experience, that we think that it's our might and our power that created the consequences, the output, the results of whatever happened. We chalk it up, we put notches in our guns, we put 4 things in a cross, whatever. We start counting as we are the reason for the victory. V'olam keminhago noheg, and then we would just behave in the world as if everything is just happening through nature, and like we said, you would forget about God or work against your faith and emunah. V'yakshavu sha'aret shalehemi, and this is going to be the big problem, that you will then think that the land belongs to you. Okay, the land belongs to God. He gave it to us, but He can throw us off too. It belongs to Him. And they would think, Heim habalim, that they are the masters, ve'ein zulatam, and no one else. Al kein hotziam Hashem min haminhag hatavi legamre. And believe it or not, I know it looks like we're living in a natural world, but trust me, here in Israel, it's totally supernatural. Okay? There's nothing natural about life here in Israel. Therefore, God removed them from the nature, the normal, natural way entirely. And now He's going to explain why and how. Ki b'shei shanim, because you know how it works in the natural world? Every 6 years, derech ha'umois laso shtei shanim zera v'shana achas labor. So basically, I don't know why He said 6 years, but let's say every 3 years, they have a pie and it's split into 3, and they rotate. And I want to tell you something about kidneyot. It's not a joke. You know how they say, oh, the Ashkenazim, it's like outdated. You know what? Even till today, in Europe, maybe not in Arabic countries, but in Europe, they know it's historically proven to be true. They did exactly this. And this rabbi lived 400 years ago in Europe. So he says this is how they did it. They took their land, they divided into 3, and they left 1/3 fallow every year. And then they discovered that if they plant beans, it actually enriches it. In other words, leaving it fallow, it may help somewhat. But if you plant beans, so if you had grains all year round, meaning twice, that's you're always planting grains, and you're leaving 1/3 fallow, plant beans during that one year, the fallow year, and it actually it replenishes, rejuvenates it. And of course, this is going to be the problem when you bag it later on, because you cannot clear a field entirely, right? If it was used for grains and you harvested the grains, even if you plant beans, you will get what do you call the residue, the leftover seeds that eventually grow into what we would call weeds. They're not weeds. They would be forbidden to cook with your beans on Pesach. So this is what he's explaining happened. That 2 years they would seed, and one of the 3 years they would leave alone, they would leave fallow. So it didn't diminish and weaken its power. But you know what God says? He actually tells us, Jew, I want you to plant for 6 years straight. Don't do what these non-Jews do, of those of little faith. You're living here in Israel. You must plant for 6 years. It says, Sheish shanim tazriya sadecha. It's like a command. 6 years you shall sow your field. Midei shana b'shana, consistently, year after year. V'ani mavtichacha, I, God, I'm going to promise you, lahosif kocha shalo tachish, that I'm going to add, I'm not going to diminish. You will have a rejuvenated field every right. It's only going to increase. It's not going to diminish. So he says, V'od nes b'tok nes. This is a miracle within a miracle. So in other words, the first miracle is that it actually increases during 6 years. Right? Every 3 years you would have expected that it would go down. But no, he says, I'm going to make it go up. So that's one miracle. And there's another miracle. Sha'achar shizrata sheishanim. After you went ahead and seeded for 6 years, im b'shnat hashishit lo yachish chelo, all the while that the 6th year will not diminish. Listen, what if I said to you, it's not going to increase? Your 6th year will be exactly like all the other years. But guess what? What does Hashem say? Nope. Adarabah. I'm actually going to cause that 6th year not to be like all the other years. That 6th year will produce 3 years worth of produce. In that 6th year that you would have expected to be diminished, not only is it going to be not diminished, the 6th year produce will be the same. It means you'll get a 6th year, you're going to get a 7th year, and you're going to get part of the 8th year as well, because the reasoning is, why is it 3 years? Because you cannot plant in the 7th year for the 8th year, so when the 8th year begins, you would not have anything until it grew. But Hashem would make sure that even in the beginning of the 8th year, you already have something before you even plant. Okay? So he said, B'shana hashishit, Yosef lo koach kokach. In the 6th year, I'm going to add so much power, so much produce is going to come. And now we understand when it says in Leviticus, it's the same chapter, 25:21, V'tziviti et birchasi b'shana hashishit, it actually says, God says, I will ordain a blessing for you in the 6th year, and it will yield a sufficient crop for 3 years. And through all these, I'll call them signs and miracles, that I place in your hand. God is telling us, Teda, you should know, Ki li kol haaretz, the land belongs to me. Remember, the original idea is that people think that it's their power, and then they become the owners, and it's all about them, and it's their land. No, we are guests. Al yedei zeyu einecha nesuos el Hashem. Through this, our eyes will be lifted, and we'll be thinking about God all the time. Right? Our eyes will be a heavenly word. Just as the man came down every single day, we had to look up towards the heavens for our food. In order that our eyes would be lifted up to Hashem constantly, and that we would have constant faith and trust in God. Kach inyan shmita. According to the Kli Yakar, this is what the Shemitah is all about. Shulo ya'avdu hadama kol shana shvi'it. Do not work the land at all in the 7th year. Ki ein zera ve'ein katzir. You don't sow, you don't harvest. V'yismichu al hanes. Actually, yes, you are going to rely on this miracle. That Hashem will produce in the 6th year enough for 3 years. As we said, this is really 2 miracles already. What are the 2 miracles? Number 1, it didn't diminish, but rather it increases. Vishlishim al kula, and there's even a greater miracle upon this. Wait till you hear this. Sha'tavua shetase b'shana hashishit, the actual produce that came out of the ground in the 6th year, even if, right, we're talking about the 6th year, the food that actually came out during that year, it was enough for that 1 year, the 6th year. Nevertheless, Yishlach Hashem es habracha v'asamehem, that Hashem will send a blessing as it's plenty. Now, the plenty does not necessarily mean in quantity. Listen to what he says. Sheyocho kima u'mitbarech b'me'av. That you just eat a normal amount, and guess what happens? You don't even have to eat. You're probably halfway through, and your stomach is just so full. The food is so sufficient. Satiating, sufficient. Yeah. You only ate a small amount, and you're already, and of course that would allow you to even save more for the other years. So he says like this: Sheyocho kima, you only eat a little bit, mitbarek b'mav, but within your stomach you're blessed. Ad shetaspik hatavua l'shalosh shanim, until the produce is actually enough for 3 whole years. And how do we know? It actually says, and we just read the verse, right? And it's also in Leviticus 25:21. V'osa es hatavua, right? It will yield its crop. The hay is hatavua, is the hay hayediyah. It's an infinitive hay, which means she'ot hatavua shehi regila lasot midei shana b'shana, that it will be the same quantity of produce that you're used to each and every year. Kain tasegam b'shana shit, you're also going to get the same amount in the 6th year. The Yosef Hashem koach ba'aretz, and yet Hashem gives more power to the land to do what? She'ast sa'ota tavua taspik l'shalosh shanim, and yet the ground itself will continue to produce for 3 whole years. Taspik l'shalosh shanim, enough. You'll have enough for 3 years. V'zed vaday nes nigla gado mikulam, and that is even a greater miracle than all the rest. Okay, so you're not even working the land and it's producing. That's like absolutely amazing. Okay, so now we're going to go for the home stretch, this last paragraph. Let's do the time. Okay. Ze tam nachona baror. This reason that I just gave is clear, but not just clear. Baror yoter mikol ma shedibru bo hameforshim. This is more clear than any other commentator has ever given. Lefiza, it's very nice, he's very humble, I do believe. And according to this, dinhu, this is logic, dictates. Shishchayvu galut ba'avona shmita. This is exactly why we should be exiled on a result of not observing Shemitah properly. Why should it be measure for measure? Why should it be the correct result? Mitzad chisteron ha'amuna shebehem, as a result of lack of faith. Kilo aminu b'Hashem, we didn't have proper faith in Hashem. V'lo bitchu b'yeshuato, we didn't trust in His salvation. Shiyasa lehem nes, that He would produce for us a miracle, kazeh, like this, ba'asiyat tavua l'shalosh shanim, that He would create for us enough produce for those 3 years. Like it says, this is the prophet Jeremiah who's being critical that you don't have people who had enough faith. And of course, this is with the result, 70-year exile we had. So it says in Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 1, walk about in the streets of Yerushalayim, and see now and know, and seek in its plaza. It's a question, a rhetorical question. If you will find a man, someone of authority, if there's one who dispenses justice and seeks faith, then I will forgive her. And of course, we were exiled. Gamart Atzmo. Listen to this. The land is alive. The land of Eretz Yisrael is full of energy. When you walk through the streets of Yerushalayim, you can feel it. You can breathe the air. The land itself is tachpid al al zemod. The land itself, it spit us out. But listen, the land wants to do God's will. Ki ratzona shidgagel zchut al ze yoda. The land itself wants to be able to produce the fruit. It wants the Jews to live here. L'chazek amuna b'Hashem hayida. It wants to be able in the 6th year to produce the 3 years of fruit. Can you imagine? If only the Jews had the emunah, the land is ready and willing to do so. Furthermore, sha'al yedei zeh yaminu ki kulam einan rak arisim bekarka. That if we had the proper emunah, we would realize we were just leasing the land. We were just sharecroppers on the land. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, He's the Baal HaSadeh. He is really the owner of the field. U'b'davar zeh ha'aretz chafetza. And in truth, this is what the land itself desires. Shekadosh Baruch Hu bi'atzmo. The land wants God to be its Baal Adonai. Can you imagine? The land wants it, and yet we fail? Unbelievable. It's like a little bit of a shame here. Because the land really belongs to God. Ubebitul hashmitot, and then God forbid when we negate and don't fulfill shmita properly, it only strengthens our own idea that we're the masters of the land. For sure the land will react negatively towards this. And that's what it means. Az tirtza aretz. Remember we said it was a Shabbos to Hashem. It's somehow sanctified and a cessation for God. And yet there's another verse that says, right, Leviticus 26:34, I think it was, that no, it's going to appease the land. It's the land is appeased. How is the land appeased? When the Jew is punished. Al umos lo tachpid, but when the Gentiles are living here, it doesn't care. It's not at all concerned. It has a special relationship with those people who belong here. If the Gentiles are living here and they're acting in the natural way, it doesn't react. Because it's not at all concerned about the way they're behaving, because they're just acting naturally and has nothing to do with faith and trust in Hashem. Now the Kli Yakar ends this paragraph by telling us, after I made this thesis, this proposal, I'm now going to go through all the verses, and you'll see everything I said has been justified and is authentic. You'll see everything lines up, conclusions are proper. Okay, and he says there is no doubt about this. So at some point, maybe next year, we'll move on in Parshas Behar. I just want you to know that we're going to take a break at this point. I just want to thank you for listening, for coming, those people on Skype. We're going to now deal with Sfirat HaOmer. It's going to be a separate video. It's going to be deep, but it's going to be extremely texturally oriented. I think I have like 60 Mar Makomot, 60 source, and we're going to read, I think it's 12 pages of a book called Olos Ephraim, a sefer that the Kli Yakar himself wrote, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. So anyway, I wish everyone a great preparation for Shavuot, right? We just celebrated Lag BaOmer, and I wish you, first of all, Shabbat Shalom, and always welcome home to Torah. A warm welcome home to Torah. And with that, Kol Tuv, have a great life.
It's